Boyd Wakefield had been ranching in northern Colorado for 37 years, and he'd never met a bull as stubborn as Wellington. The massive Hereford, weighing nearly 1,800 pounds and standing 6 feet at the shoulder, was supposed to be loaded into the livestock trailer by 2 p.m. for transport to Sterling Genetics, a breeding facility 60 miles east of his Weld County ranch. At 58, Boyd prided himself on running his operation with military precision. Schedules mattered in the cattle business. Breeding appointments, feed deliveries, veterinary visits, and livestock transport all required exact timing to maintain profitability on his 200-acre ranch that had been in the Wakefield family since 1962. But Wellington had other ideas. "Come on, big fellow," Boyd coaxed, holding a lead rope while his ranch hand, 23-year-old Caleb Thornberry, positioned the loading ramp behind the 3-year-old bull. "We've got a 2-hour drive ahead of us, and Dr. Martinez is expecting us by 4:30. Wellington stood motionless 20 feet from the truck, his massive head raised and turned slightly toward the western horizon. The bull's ears were forward, rotating slowly like radar dishes, and his nostrils flared as he tested the air for scents that humans couldn't detect. "Never seen him act like this," Caleb observed, wiping sweat from his forehead. The afternoon temperature was 78 degrees under partly cloudy skies, perfect weather for livestock transport. "Usually he loads right up without any fuss." Boyd checked his watch. 2:15 p.m. They were already behind schedule, and the drive to Sterling would take them through Denver's afternoon traffic if they didn't leave soon. "Wellington, we don't have time for this," Boyd said firmly, applying gentle pressure with the lead rope. The bull took one step toward the truck, then stopped again, his attention fixed on something in the distance that neither man could see or hear. The sky was typical for late May in Colorado, scattered white clouds building over the Front Range mountains, with no immediate signs of severe weather. The National Weather Service had issued no warnings for Weld County, and Boyd's weather radio had been silent all morning. "Maybe we should try backing him up to the truck instead," Caleb suggested. "Sometimes they load better if they can't see the trailer." But when they attempted to turn Wellington around, the bull planted his feet and refused to move in any direction. His entire posture suggested an animal in a state of high alert, listening and sensing things that remained invisible to human observation. "Boyd, look at his behavior," said Dr. Patricia Vernon, the ranch's veterinarian who had arrived to perform a final health check before transport. At 45, Dr. Vernon had been treating livestock in northern Colorado for 20 years, and she'd learned to pay attention when animals displayed unusual behavior patterns. "What do you mean?" "His ear position, the way he's testing the air, the fact that he won't move toward the truck. In my experience, cattle demonstrate this kind of resistance when they sense environmental changes that humans miss." Boyd respected Dr. Vernon's expertise, but he also had contractual obligations and a business to run. Sterling Genetics had scheduled artificial insemination procedures for the next morning, and canceling would cost him both the breeding fee and potential future bookings. "Doc, we're already running late. Wellington's probably just having an off day." "Boyd, I've seen this behavior before, usually about 6 to 8 hours before severe weather hits. Cattle have pressure-sensitive organs that detect barometric changes long before meteorological equipment registers them." Dr. Vernon pointed toward Wellington's posture and positioning. "Look how he's oriented toward the west. That's where our severe weather typically originates. He's not being stubborn. He's responding to sensory information we can't access." Caleb checked his phone for weather updates. Weather app shows partly cloudy with a 0% chance of precipitation. Winds from the southwest at 8 miles per hour. "Weather apps don't always capture microclimatic conditions in Colorado," Dr. Vernon replied. "The mountains create atmospheric disturbances that can develop into severe weather with very little warning." Boyd found himself caught between professional obligations and an increasingly uncomfortable feeling that Wellington might be trying to communicate something important. The bull had never displayed this kind of resistance before, and his usually docile temperament had been replaced by obvious anxiety. "Dr. Vernon, if we don't make this appointment, Sterling might not reschedule for weeks. We're talking about genetic lines that could improve our herd quality for the next decade. And if Wellington is right about incoming weather, we could be talking about human safety issues that matter more than breeding schedules." As they debated their options, Wellington's behavior became more pronounced. The bull began pacing in a tight circle, never taking his attention off the western horizon and making low rumbling sounds that neither Boyd nor Caleb had heard from him before. "That's not normal vocalization," Dr. Vernon observed. "He's demonstrating distress calls that cattle typically make when they sense immediate danger." Boyd made a decision that prioritized business obligations over animal instincts. "We're loading him. Caleb, get the trailer positioned right behind him. If Wellington won't walk up the ramp voluntarily, we'll encourage him with feed." But as they attempted to coax Wellington toward the truck with his favorite grain mixture, the bull's resistance intensified. Instead of moving toward the food, he backed away from both the grain and the trailer, his agitation becoming more obvious with each passing minute. "Boyd, I really think we should listen to what he's trying to tell us," Dr. Vernon insisted. "And I think we're anthropomorphizing normal animal behavior," Boyd replied, though his confidence was beginning to waver. "Wellington's a bull, not a meteorologist." At 2:45 p.m., they finally managed to position Wellington near the loading ramp through a combination of rope guidance and strategic placement of feed. But as the bull approached the trailer's entrance, he stopped completely and would not take another step forward. "That's it," Boyd said, his patience exhausted. "Dr. Vernon, sedate him if you have to. We're loading this bull and making our appointment." "Boyd, I strongly advise against sedating an animal that's displaying obvious environmental stress responses." "Then I'll load him myself." As Boyd moved toward Wellington with increased determination to force the issue, none of them noticed the subtle changes in atmospheric pressure, wind direction, and cloud formation that the bull had been monitoring for the past hour. Wellington's refusal to enter the truck wasn't stubbornness. It was an attempt to save their lives from a natural disaster that was already forming 30 miles to the west and moving directly toward the Wakefield ranch at 40 miles per hour. In 5 minutes, they would understand exactly what Wellington had been trying to tell them. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like to support the work, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next releases. At 2:50 p.m., just as Boyd was preparing to force Wellington into the trailer, the bull did something that made all three humans stop what they were doing. The massive animal suddenly raised his head high, let out a deep, resonant bellow that echoed across the entire ranch, and began backing away from the truck with urgent, deliberate steps. "I've never heard him make that sound," Caleb said, his voice showing concern for the first time since they'd started the loading process. Dr. Vernon pulled out her phone and opened a professional weather radar app that provided more detailed atmospheric data than consumer applications. What she saw made her face go pale. "Boyd, we have a problem. There's a severe cell developing west of Fort Collins that wasn't on the Weather Service radar 20 minutes ago. It's moving east at 45 miles per hour, and it's intensifying rapidly." "How rapidly?" "Rapidly enough that the National Weather Service just issued a severe thunderstorm warning for western Weld County. Estimated time of arrival, 15 minutes. Boyd looked at the sky, which still appeared partly cloudy with no obvious signs of immediate danger. But Wellington's behavior was becoming more agitated by the minute, and the bull was now positioning himself as far from the truck as his lead rope would allow. "If there's a storm coming, wouldn't we want to get Wellington loaded and under cover?" "Not if he's sensing something we're not," Dr. Vernon replied, studying her phone's radar display with growing alarm. "Boyd, this cell is showing rotation characteristics. We might be looking at supercell development with possible tornado activity." Caleb scanned the western horizon and pointed toward a bank of clouds that seemed to be building higher and darker than they had been just minutes earlier. "Is that what he's been watching?" The cloud formation was still distant, but it was clearly developing vertical structure that hadn't been visible when they'd started trying to load Wellington. More disturbing, the wind direction had shifted from southwest to southeast, and the air temperature had dropped noticeably in the past few minutes. Wellington's response to these changes was immediate and unmistakable. The bull began pulling against his lead rope with increasing urgency, trying to move toward the concrete shelter of the milking barn about 200 yards from where the truck was parked. "He wants to get to solid shelter," Dr. Vernon observed. "Boyd, cattle have survival instincts that have been refined over thousands of years. When they sense atmospheric disturbances that indicate severe weather, they seek the safest available location. You're saying Wellington knows something we don't?" "I'm saying Wellington's sensory capabilities allow him to detect barometric pressure changes, electromagnetic fields, and infrasonic vibrations that humans can't perceive. He's been trying to warn us for the past hour. As if summoned by their conversation, Boyd's weather radio suddenly crackled to life with an urgent alert. The National Weather Service has issued a severe thunderstorm warning for eastern Larimer and western Weld counties, effective immediately until 4:30 p.m. Storms are capable of producing hail up to golf ball size, winds in excess of 70 miles per hour, and possible tornadogenesis. Residents should take immediate shelter and avoid travel until storms pass. Boyd looked at his truck and trailer, parked directly under a massive cottonwood tree that had provided shade for livestock operations on his ranch for over 60 years. The tree was healthy and had weathered countless Colorado storms, but the weather radio's mention of 70-mile-per-hour winds suddenly made its location seem less than ideal. "Maybe we should move the truck away from the tree," Caleb suggested, voicing what all three of them were beginning to think. "And maybe we should listen to Wellington and get ourselves to solid shelter," Dr. Vernon added, noting that the bull was now pulling so hard against his lead rope that he was in danger of injuring himself. Boyd made a decision that went against every business instinct he'd developed over 3 decades of ranching. Release Wellington. Let him go where he wants to go. The moment Caleb unclipped the lead rope, Wellington bolted toward the milking barn with surprising speed for such a massive animal. He didn't stop at the barn entrance but continued to the concrete feed storage area in the back of the building, the most structurally sound location on the entire ranch. "He's heading for the safest spot on the property," Dr. Vernon observed. "Boyd, I think we should follow his example." But Boyd was looking at his expensive truck and trailer, still parked under the cottonwood tree, and calculating the financial impact of missing the Sterling genetics appointment. "Let me just move the truck to open ground, then we'll take shelter. It'll only take 2 minutes." "Boyd, the storm cell is moving at 45 miles per hour. 2 minutes might be too long." As if nature was responding to their conversation, the wind suddenly increased from 8 miles per hour to what felt like 30, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in less than a minute. The western horizon, which had shown only building clouds 15 minutes earlier, now displayed a wall of dark gray that stretched from north to south as far as they could see. "Okay, that's legitimately scary," Caleb said, his young voice carrying the first note of real fear. "Maybe the bull was right about this." Dr. Vernon was monitoring multiple weather apps and radio frequencies, gathering information that painted an increasingly dangerous picture. "Boyd, this storm has just been upgraded to a severe thunderstorm warning with possible tornado development. The National Weather Service is recommending immediate shelter for all residents in the storm path. How much time do we have?" "Based on the storm's speed and location, maybe 5 to 7 minutes before it hits us directly." Boyd looked toward the milking barn where Wellington had taken shelter, then back at his truck and trailer representing thousands of dollars in equipment and lost business opportunities. "I'm moving the truck. You two get to the barn with Wellington." "Boyd, don't—" But Boyd was already jogging toward his vehicle, keys in hand, determined to save his equipment from potential hail damage by moving it away from the tree that had suddenly become a potential hazard rather than protection. As he started the truck's engine, neither Dr. Vernon nor Caleb could have predicted that Wellington's refusal to enter the trailer had just saved all their lives, and that Boyd's decision to prioritize equipment over safety was about to provide a dramatic demonstration of why humans should sometimes listen to animals who know things we don't. The storm that Wellington had been sensing for over an hour was about to arrive with devastating force, and the cottonwood tree that had provided shade for 60 years was about to become a weapon capable of crushing anything beneath it. At exactly 2:55 p.m., as Boyd started his truck engine to move it away from the cottonwood tree, Wellington let out another deep bellow from the safety of the milking barn, this one more urgent and insistent than any sound Dr. Vernon had heard from cattle in her 20 years of veterinary practice. "Boyd, don't move that truck!" Dr. Vernon shouted, but her voice was already being swallowed by wind that had increased to over 40 miles per hour in the span of 30 seconds. Caleb looked toward the western horizon and felt his stomach drop. What had been a distant line of dark clouds just minutes earlier was now a towering wall of black and green that stretched across the entire sky, moving toward them with frightening speed. "Dr. Vernon, that doesn't look like a normal thunderstorm." "Because it's not," she replied, reading the latest weather data on her phone with growing alarm. The National Weather Service just issued a tornado warning for western Weld County. Doppler radar is showing strong rotation in the supercell, and it's moving directly toward us. From the barn, Wellington's distress calls became more frequent and urgent, as if the bull was trying to communicate that the immediate danger was far greater than any of the humans realized. Boyd had managed to start his truck and was beginning to back away from the cottonwood tree when the first golf ball-sized hailstones began falling. Within seconds, the hail increased to tennis ball size, creating a deafening roar as it struck the truck's metal surfaces and the ground around him. "Boyd, get out of there!" Caleb yelled, but the rancher was determined to move his expensive equipment to safety before taking shelter himself. As Boyd maneuvered the truck and trailer away from the tree, the wind suddenly intensified to a level that made driving nearly impossible. Gusts that the Weather Service would later measure at 85 miles per hour rocked the heavy vehicle, and hailstones the size of softballs began mixed with the smaller ice. Dr. Vernon grabbed Caleb's arm and began pulling him toward the milking barn. "We need to get to concrete shelter right now. This is about to become life-threatening." Inside the barn, Wellington had positioned himself in the back corner of the concrete feed storage area, the most structurally sound location in the building. The bull's behavior showed he understood that the immediate threat was far from over. He remained alert and agitated, his attention focused on the sounds of the approaching storm. "Look at Wellington," Dr. Vernon said as they reached the barn entrance. "He's not relaxing even though he's in shelter. That tells me the worst part of the storm is still coming." Boyd had managed to move his truck about 50 yards from the cottonwood tree when the microburst hit with devastating force. Wind speeds that meteorologists would later estimate at over 100 miles per hour struck the ranch with the destructive power of a weak tornado, accompanied by hail approaching the size of baseballs. The rancher quickly realized that staying in the truck was no longer an option. He abandoned the vehicle and ran toward the barn through hail and wind that threatened to knock him off his feet with every step. "Get to the back with Wellington!" Dr. Vernon shouted as Boyd stumbled through the barn entrance, his clothes torn and his face bloodied from hailstone impacts. As the four of them, 3 humans and 1 bull, huddled in the concrete storage area, the full fury of the Colorado microburst struck the ranch with terrifying intensity. The sound was unlike anything any of them had experienced. A combination of freight train, jet engine, and continuous thunder that made conversation impossible. Wellington remained surprisingly calm now that all the humans had taken proper shelter. The bull seemed to understand that his warning had been heeded, and his family was now safe from the immediate danger he'd been sensing. "How long do these things usually last?" Caleb shouted over the noise. 5 to 10 minutes for the worst part," Dr. Vernon replied. "But the damage can be—" Her words were cut off by a sound that made all of them instinctively duck lower, the unmistakable crack and roar of a massive tree falling. Through the barn's small windows, they could see the 60-year-old cottonwood tree that had shaded the ranch for generations slowly topple under the force of the wind. The massive trunk, over 3 feet in diameter, fell directly across the spot where Boyd's truck and trailer had been parked just 5 minutes earlier. "Sweet Jesus," Boyd whispered, staring at the destruction. "If Wellington hadn't refused to load, if we'd been in that trailer when the tree came down..." The implications hit all of them simultaneously. The livestock trailer, built to transport cattle, would have provided no protection against a tree of that size and weight. Anyone inside would have been killed instantly. "Wellington saved our lives," Caleb said, his voice barely audible over the continuing storm. He knew that tree was going to fall. Dr. Vernon was documenting the scene with her phone, capturing evidence of what would become one of the most remarkable examples of animal weather prediction she'd ever witnessed. "Boyd, cattle don't predict the future, but they can sense atmospheric conditions that indicate immediate environmental threats." Wellington detected the barometric pressure changes, wind patterns, and possibly infrasonic vibrations that indicated this area was about to experience severe straight-line winds. "You're saying he knew the tree would fall?" "I'm saying he knew conditions were developing that would make large trees extremely dangerous. His refusal to enter the trailer and his insistence on moving to solid shelter probably saved all our lives." As the worst of the storm began to pass, leaving behind a ranch landscape transformed by hail damage and fallen trees, Wellington finally began to relax. The bull's posture changed from alert vigilance to the more typical calm demeanor they were accustomed to seeing. Look at him now, Boyd observed. He knows the danger has passed. The microburst had lasted exactly 8 minutes, but it had caused damage that would take months to repair. In addition to the cottonwood tree that had fallen on Boyd's truck parking spot, 2 other large trees on the ranch had been uprooted, several outbuildings had lost roofs, and the hail had caused significant damage to vehicles and equipment that hadn't been moved to covered areas. But most importantly, no humans or animals had been injured. An outcome that Boyd increasingly understood was due entirely to Wellington's extraordinary weather sense and stubborn refusal to cooperate with human schedules. Dr. Vernon, how did he know? Boyd asked as they surveyed the damage after the storm passed. How did Wellington understand what was coming when our weather equipment missed it until the last minute? Because animals haven't lost the survival instincts that kept their ancestors alive for millions of years. We've become dependent on technology for information that cattle still gather through senses we've forgotten how to use. As they stood in the aftermath of the microburst, looking at the massive tree that would have killed them all, Boyd realized that Wellington's disobedience had been the most important lesson in ranch management he'd learned in 37 years. Sometimes the animals know better than the humans who think they're in charge. 3 weeks after the microburst that Wellington had predicted, Boyd Wakefield found himself standing before a packed auditorium at Colorado State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, telling a story that was challenging everything agricultural scientists thought they knew about animal behavior and weather prediction. Folks, I've been ranching for 37 years, Boyd began, addressing an audience of veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and atmospheric scientists. I thought I knew everything about reading weather and managing livestock. But a 1,800-pound Hereford bull taught me that animals see things we're blind to. Dr. Patricia Vernon, who had documented the entire incident with photographs and detailed veterinary observations, was presenting their case as part of a groundbreaking study on animal weather prediction being conducted by CSU's Animal Behavior Research Center. Wellington demonstrated classic pre-storm behavior that we've documented in cattle for decades, Dr. Vernon explained to the scientific audience. But what made this case remarkable was the specificity of his predictions and the dramatic validation when the tree fell exactly where he'd refused to go. The story had attracted national attention after Dr. Vernon published her findings in the Journal of Applied Animal Behavior Science. Wellington's accurate prediction of the microburst had occurred at a time when Doppler radar showed no severe weather developing, making his sensory abilities even more remarkable to the scientific community. Dr. Vernon, can you explain the physiological mechanisms that might allow cattle to predict severe weather with such accuracy? Asked Dr. Rebecca Martinez from the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Cattle possess several sensory capabilities that humans lack, Dr. Vernon replied. They can detect infrasonic vibrations below human hearing range, sense minute changes in barometric pressure through specialized organs, and perceive electromagnetic field variations that often precede severe weather. Boyd had brought Wellington to the university for behavioral testing that confirmed the bull possessed extraordinary atmospheric sensitivity. When exposed to controlled pressure changes that simulated approaching storm systems, Wellington consistently demonstrated the same agitation and shelter-seeking behavior they'd witnessed before the microburst. The remarkable thing, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher studying Wellington, is that his responses to simulated weather conditions occur approximately 6 to 8 hours before human meteorological equipment detects the same atmospheric changes, which means Wellington was sensing the developing microburst while it was still forming over the Front Range Mountains, long before it became visible or detectable through conventional weather monitoring, Boyd added. The implications for both animal welfare and human safety were significant. Wellington's case had inspired research projects at agricultural universities across the country, with scientists studying whether livestock behavior could provide early warning systems for severe weather in rural areas. We're documenting similar cases throughout Colorado and the Great Plains, Dr. Martinez reported. Ranchers are beginning to share stories of cattle, horses, and sheep displaying unusual behavior before tornadoes, microbursts, and severe hailstorms. Caleb Thornberry, who had become something of a local celebrity for his role in documenting Wellington's behavior, was now working with Colorado State Extension to develop educational materials for ranchers about interpreting animal weather prediction. The old-timers always said to watch the animals for weather signs, Caleb told the university audience, but we stopped paying attention when we got radar and weather apps. Wellington reminded us that sometimes the oldest methods are still the most accurate. The research had practical applications that extended far beyond academic interest. Insurance companies were beginning to study whether ranchers who monitored animal behavior experienced fewer weather-related losses than those who relied solely on technological forecasting. Wellington's case suggests that integrating animal behavior observations with conventional meteorology could significantly improve severe weather prediction accuracy, explained Dr. Janet Foster from the National Weather Service's Boulder office. We're now training our field meteorologists to work with ranchers and farmers who report unusual livestock behavior, because animals like Wellington may provide crucial early warning information that our instruments miss. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the change in Boyd's relationship with his cattle and his approach to ranch management. The man who had once prioritized schedules over animal instincts now considered livestock behavior to be his most important source of environmental information. "Wellington's still my prize breeding bull," Boyd told the audience with obvious affection. "But now I also think of him as my chief meteorologist. When he gets agitated about weather, we take shelter first and ask questions later." The Sterling Genetics breeding appointment that had seemed so crucial 3 weeks earlier had been rescheduled without any problems. More importantly, Boyd had learned that animal welfare and human safety were more valuable than any business timeline. The day Wellington refused to enter that truck, he saved 4 lives, Boyd reflected. Mine, Dr. Vernon's, Caleb's, and his own. He did what animals have been doing for millions of years. He protected his family from environmental threats that we were too distracted to notice. Dr. Vernon presented data showing that Wellington's weather predictions had been accurate in 17 subsequent instances over the 3 weeks since the microburst. The bull consistently demonstrated agitated behavior 6 to 8 hours before severe weather arrived at the ranch, providing early warning that had prevented equipment damage and potential injuries. "What we're learning," Dr. Vernon concluded, "is that domestic animals retain survival instincts that are far more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. Wellington isn't psychic. He's using sensory capabilities that evolution refined over millions of years." As the presentation concluded, Boyd received dozens of requests from ranchers across Colorado asking for advice on how to interpret their own animals' weather-related behavior. Wellington's story had reminded an entire agricultural community that sometimes the most advanced technology comes in the form of instincts that have been protecting animal families since long before humans learned to read the sky. The bull who had refused to enter a truck had become a symbol of the wisdom that rural communities gained when they learned to listen to the animals who shared their land. And in rural Colorado, where severe weather could appear with little warning and devastating consequences, that wisdom was literally saving lives. 1 year after Wellington's life-saving weather prediction, the Wakefield Ranch had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for ranchers, veterinarians, and meteorologists from across the American West. What had started as one bull's stubborn refusal to enter a truck had evolved into a revolutionary approach to severe weather prediction that was transforming agricultural practices throughout the Great Plains. Boyd stood in his newly constructed Wellington Weather Station, a small observation building where he monitored both traditional meteorological equipment and the behavior of his cattle herd, which had proven to be remarkably accurate at predicting severe weather events. "We've documented 43 successful weather predictions in the past 12 months, Boyd explained to a delegation of ranchers from Nebraska who had driven to Colorado to learn his methods. Wellington and the other cattle show agitated behavior an average of 7 hours before severe weather hits, with 94% accuracy. The National Weather Service had partnered with Boyd's Ranch to create the first official animal weather observation station, where livestock behavior was recorded alongside traditional atmospheric data to improve forecasting models for rural areas. "What we've discovered," explained Dr. Patricia Vernon, who now served as the project's chief veterinary researcher, is that Wellington wasn't unique. Most cattle possess these weather-sensing abilities. We just hadn't been paying attention to their warnings. The program had expanded to include over 200 ranches across Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Kansas, creating a network of animal-based weather observers who reported livestock behavior to meteorologists studying severe weather patterns. Caleb Thornberry, now 24 and studying agricultural meteorology at Colorado State University, had documented the most comprehensive database of animal weather prediction ever assembled. The data shows that cattle, horses and sheep consistently detect atmospheric changes that precede tornadoes, microbursts, and severe hailstorms, Caleb reported. Their warning signals include restlessness, seeking shelter, reluctance to move to open areas, and specific vocalizations that indicate different types of approaching weather. Wellington himself had become something of a celebrity in the agricultural community. The now 4-year-old bull continued to demonstrate extraordinary weather sensitivity, and his predictions had prevented equipment damage and potential injuries dozens of times. Wellington saved us approximately $150,000 in storm damage over the past year, Boyd calculated. Insurance companies are starting to offer premium discounts to ranchers who participate in animal weather observation programs. Dr. Rebecca Martinez from the National Center for Atmospheric Research had published groundbreaking studies showing that animal behavior data significantly improved severe weather forecasting accuracy in rural areas where traditional radar coverage was limited. Animals like Wellington provide atmospheric information that our instruments can't detect, Dr. Martinez explained. They're essentially living barometers that give us 6 to 8 hours of advance warning for severe weather events. The success of the Wellington Weather Station had inspired similar programs across the country. Agricultural universities were now training meteorology students to work with ranchers, while veterinary schools were teaching animal behavior courses that included weather prediction techniques. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was on the relationship between humans and livestock throughout rural America. Ranchers who had once viewed cattle as simply agricultural products were rediscovering the intelligence and survival instincts that domestic animals had retained from their wild ancestors. Wellington taught us that our animals are partners, not just property, Boyd reflected during a ceremony marking the first anniversary of the microburst. When we listen to what they're trying to tell us, we all become safer and more successful. The fallen cottonwood tree that would have killed them had been preserved as a monument to the importance of trusting animal instincts. A bronze plaque at the site read, "In memory of the day we learned that sometimes the animals know better than the humans who think they're in charge." Emma Wakefield, Boyd's 16-year-old granddaughter who had moved to the ranch to help with the weather observation program, represented a new generation of ranchers who were learning to integrate traditional animal husbandry with modern meteorological science. "Grandpa taught me to watch Wellington and the other cattle for weather signs," Emma explained to visitors. "It's like having a conversation with animals who can see things we can't. They're not just predicting weather, they're protecting their family, which includes us." The educational impact extended beyond agricultural communities. Elementary schools throughout Colorado were teaching children about animal weather prediction as part of their science curricula, helping young people understand the remarkable sensory capabilities that evolution had developed in domestic animals. Wellington's story shows us that animals and humans have been partners in survival for thousands of years, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, who continued studying the bull's extraordinary abilities. Modern technology made us forget those partnerships, but animals like Wellington are reminding us how much we can learn from each other. 5 years after the microburst, Boyd had written a book about his experiences titled, "The Bull Who Saved My Life: What Animals Know About Weather That We've Forgotten." The book became required reading in agricultural programs across the country and inspired a new field of study called applied animal meteorology. Wellington, now 8 years old and still the ranch's most reliable weather predictor, continued to sire calves that demonstrated similar atmospheric sensitivity. The Wellington bloodline was becoming sought after by ranchers who wanted cattle capable of providing early weather warnings. "We're not just breeding for size and meat quality anymore," Boyd explained to agricultural journalists. "We're breeding for intelligence, weather sensitivity, and the kind of survival instincts that can protect both animals and humans." As Boyd walked through his pastures on the anniversary of Wellington's famous prediction, he reflected on how much his understanding of ranching had changed. The man who had once prioritized schedules over animal instincts now considered his cattle to be his most trusted advisors on everything from weather to land management. Wellington grazed peacefully in the same field where he had refused to enter the truck, his massive frame a testament to the wisdom that domestic animals retained from millions of years of evolution. When storm clouds gathered on the western horizon, he would still alert his human family with the same urgent calls that had saved their lives. The bull who wouldn't cooperate had taught an entire agricultural community that sometimes the most important partnerships are built on listening rather than commanding, and that the animals who share our land often know things that could save our lives if we're humble enough to pay attention. In rural Colorado, where severe weather remained a constant threat, Wellington's legacy continued protecting families who had learned that their livestock were not just agricultural assets, but partners in survival whose instincts deserved respect, attention, and trust.